So as always, I'd like to start by saying thank you everyone for joining. My name is Cody Armstrong, and today we're talking about the best practices for managing documents in Onshape. And this is another webinar that's really driven by user feedback, by your questions. So we talk a lot about how to create features, how to create assemblies, all the details of drawings, but we don't really talk about how to manage all these documents that we've been created, and just a general kind of a best practices guide for how a lot of users are successfully managing all these documents in Onshape. So I have a few tips for you, a few bits of general advice when we start talking about larger designs, more complex scenarios where you have standard library parts, things that are shared between different documents, and so on. So again, the idea today is not so much to focus on the CAD, but the more management aspect, the data management aspects of using Onshape. How do we structure our documents in a way that's effective? Now, I will say this is another area that we're working on. So you're going to see improvements along a lot of other things that we're working on, of course. This is an area that we're always working on improving. And you're going to see those improvements hopefully here very soon. But there's a lot you could do today, and there's a lot that I want to focus on in terms of how you would structure that data today. All right, so let's jump into it. Now, as I always say with these webinars, again, feel free to ask any question that you'd like. There's a questions dialog in the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to ask any question, and I'll stop and answer the questions from time to time as we go through things. So let's dig in. Now, the agenda is pretty straightforward. I really want to show you a few different tools that I think can help you organize your documents. The first being, things like folders and the search and the tab manager inside of a document. So how do we structure our tabs within a document? And then how do we structure the documents themselves? Are there ways to organize them? Is there things that we can do that are generally accepted best practices for how to structure a document? I think the big question that a lot of users ask is, what goes into a single document? What do I put into a document versus separating it out to its own document? I'm going to try to address some of those questions as well. So that's a brief agenda. I want to show you just some different organizational tools, both in the document and in the documents page. And then I'm going to go into what do I consider a best practice for what to put in a document when we talk about what to put in a document versus a separate document. All right, so let's get into it. Now, the first thing I want to stress is the in-document organization tool. So as your document grows, you have all these tabs in the document. And you're going to have tabs for parts, tabs for assemblies, tabs for drawings, tabs for imported files. And it can lead to a very messy tab display at the bottom where it's just difficult to find what you're looking for. So there are two things that I'd recommend in this scenario. As your document grows, a way of organizing the document itself is to A, create folders, and B, use the tab manager as a way to get around within the document. As you add more and more tabs to a document, finding the tab that you're looking for becomes difficult if you're just scrolling along the bottom, right? There's preview windows, there's things we've done to try and improve that, but I think the most effective, the most efficient users are creating folders and using the tab manager as a means to find the tab that they're looking for. The reason I bring this up is you can use the tab manager and do a search. You can filter by element types. It's a much easier way to find what you're looking for than just hunting with your cursor along the bottom of the screen. So these are two in-document organization tools that can really make a difference, especially as you start to grow in the document size. So let me give you an example of this. Here we have an assembly. Now, this is only 7 or 8 tabs, but this is a great example of where I can start to organize, right? I've reached a point now where it's a headache and I don't know what these tabs are for, and I want to be able to organize them as I add more and more. So the first thing I would point out is creating a folder. You can create folders however you'd like. I can create folders to store all of my imported models in a single folder. And maybe I'd store all of my imported files, the spreadsheets or the miscellaneous things I've imported. I would store those in a folder. Maybe all the parts would go in a folder. Maybe all the parts of a certain subassembly would go in a folder. So how you structure your folders is entirely up to you. And we like to say that if you think about how you did it in the past, you used files, you put them into a certain folder structure that you decided that made sense to you. You can very much do something similar here in this environment. So how you choose to organize things entirely up to you. A lot of times there are company practices that come into effect here. You have to think about, of course, all of that relays back to, just how do you want to structure your data. So first off, creating a folder. You can create a folder from the plus icon in the bottom left corner. So in your document, you click the plus icon, you'll see the option to create folder. Like it implies, it's going to create a folder. Now the folder is just a tab in your document. Let's call this imported, right? But now I can drag things into that tab. And I literally just drag a tab over the folder, right? And you'll see those tabs disappear. So now I have 2 fewer tabs, and I've taken the 2 imported parts of my assembly and I've dropped them into this imported folder. Right, so you can see if I start having dozens of these imported parts, I don't want to have dozens of individual tabs in my main space. I'll put them in folders. Now, how do you interact with folders? Pretty straightforward. You left click a folder to expand it. Right, so I left click the folder. You can see it now has the little folder icon on the left here and 2 tabs within the folder. In this case, just 2 socket head cap screws. So I have these 2 parts that are within this folder. Right? I don't see all the other tabs. You'll notice that the assembly, all the other tabs that we saw a moment ago, we're not seeing because now we're inside of this folder. The question then becomes, well, how do I get out of the folder? You can click the little house symbol, the all tab symbol, and that will expand you back to the point where you were a moment ago, where you're seeing, the imported as a folder. So just keep in mind, creating folders, adding tabs to folders is very, very easy. And this, again, we haven't really interacted with the tab manager yet. So this is if you want to use just the tabs along the bottom. Now, I will recommend if you're going to do a lot of this, and you're going to do a lot of jumping around, and I think, what I would call a power user does a lot is use the tab manager. Now, the tab manager is in the bottom left corner of the screen. So right next to the plus icon, you'll see the tab manager. If you left click that, it flies out with the tab manager on the left side. Now, one neat thing that I've seen, and this is from the really heavy users that are really efficient, is keyboard shortcuts. And a question I get asked often is, is there a way for me to jump between tabs really quickly without touching my mouse? And the answer is yes. You can use Alt-T to fly out with the tab manager, right? I can do a search. Again, just using the keyboard, enter, right? And I'll open up that tab. So you can interact with things. You can move up and down in your tab manager with keyboard shortcuts. And that's why I think it's really efficient if you're a big fan of just using the keyboard, not interacting as much with the mouse or just trying to find a fast way to get things, get to give different tabs in the document. So again, the tab manager is definitely for those very efficient users, what I would call the power user, but it's a fast way of getting around, searching for what you're looking for, especially important as you add more and more things to it, right? This list will grow. You will be scrolling up and down to find the things you're looking for. It's just much easier to search and even filter. So I can search by parts with the name X, right? I can search by assemblies or drawings or combinations of those things by choosing the filters here, right? You can sort by name or by type. So as you start sorting, you can sort by, you can see drawing or part studio in this case. So you can filter, you can sort by different types, you can view things in a different orientation if you choose to. But again, the ability here is just the ability to get to things quickly. I can search, quickly find it, and bring it up without having to hunt, so to speak, through the different tabs. Now, another thing I want to mention is you do have the ability to do things that you would normally do when you're right-clicking. So, we're all familiar with if I right-click a tab, I see a list of options relative to that tab. You get all those same options in this right-click menu. Right, so if I right-click, I have the same export, move, properties, all those details that you'd expect to see. I can right-click on. I can also do things like create a new folder. And yes, you can have a folder within a folder. That's another commonly asked question. I can drag things into a folder from here, same as I can at the tabs along the bottom. So you have the right-click menu is a really important one in this tab manager. If you right-click an individual tab, you'll see those same list of options that you would see if you're right-clicking on the bottom, the export, the rename, and so on. But you also have things like new folders. Add this to a new folder. I can drag and drop things into a folder from here. I can shift select or control select, right? Multiple things and drag them into a folder from here. So it's a very valuable tool in organizing a document, especially if you're in a scenario now where you have this document with dozens of tabs and you're like, whoa, how am I going to organize this effectively? I certainly don't want to drag one tab at a time into a folder. I can just shift select, control select, create my folders, drag them into it, all from this tab manager. And it's just an easy way to accomplish that. So again, the tab manager, I can't stress it enough. As you start to get more and more detailed in using Onshape, that's going to become an important one for you. Question. Can you search by part number? No, I don't think so. I think it's only doing a search by name. I'm quite certain that it's search by name. We do have an advanced search in the documents page where you can search by part number, but not within the document. I believe that's a limitation. I can try it to be 100% certain at the end here, but I'm fairly certain that's a limitation in the tab manager. Right? I'll show you advanced search of the documents page in a bit. But if those two parts are located in two different folders, is there a good way to go back and forth between them easily? If those two parts are in different folders, well, the tab manager, I would just expand out. Getting between folders in the tab manager would probably be the easiest way to get back and forth between them. Do folders act like part studios in that you're allowed to duplicate and rename? No, you cannot duplicate a folder. You could rename a folder, sure. Duplicate, no. No, it doesn't. You duplicate a part studio, not the folder at that level, right? Because remember, too, you can have more than just part studios in a folder. You can have assemblies, you can have anything you want can go in a folder. So any tab, basically. How do you delete a folder? This is a very good question. The answer is unpack. So when you right-click a folder, you'll see an option to unpack the folder, and that essentially just takes everything in it, throws it back into the one level up, and deletes the folder. So again, right-click the folder, you'll see that option to unpack. Can you duplicate a part inside of a folder? Well, let's try. So let's take this there. Okay. Yeah, if I duplicate. Now the question is, yeah, it does. It goes right into that folder. So yeah, so you would just right-click your Part Studio in the folder and say duplicate, and it's going to drop the duplicate right into that folder. I haven't tried that myself, so that's a first for me too. I use another window to have multiple tabs showing at the same time. Yeah, sure. You can have as many windows open as you would like. All right, so that's the tab manager. The big thing I would stress here is you can drag and drop into folders from here. You can create folders inside of folders or just folders in general from here and drag. So I would use this as my main kind of platform or my main space for organizing my documents. That's the way I would think of it. Question, can you manually unpack single items from a folder? Yes, just drag them back out. So all you should have to do is grab the tab from within the folder and drag it out of the folder, and it should unpack that single item, so to speak. So again, that unpack function I was showing you a moment ago, you really only want to do that if you want to delete the folder and then put everything back to the next level up, right? All right, so let's move on. Now, that is the tab manager, and again, folders. Folders are those are the primary tools that you have for organizing things within a document. And I think as you get more and more tabs in your document, that's really what it's about. Is it how do I structure these tabs in a way that makes sense to me, that allows me to find them quickly. I can't stress the tab manager enough. As you get more and more complex designs, searching is just a valuable way to find them. And you don't have to even grab the mouse to do it, right? It's one of the fast things that you can do search out a tab in the tab manager, and then get to it rather quickly. So again, this is definitely for those, what I would say, power users that are 8 hours a day using Onshape and are trying to find little ways that they can speed things up and organize them in a more effective manner. All right, so that is the in-document organization tools that I would recommend. Now, the other question that I get asked is, how would you recommend structuring the documents themselves? So, if I go to the documents page, I just see a list of all my documents. Is there a way I can organize that list? And this is an area that we're working on. But it's also there are some things you can do right now that really help in this. And the thing that I would say is, there are two things to consider. First off, labels make it an easy way to tag documents under a certain name. So if I had multiple documents that are all kind of related in some way, I might tag them all with the same label, right? And that means that I can efficiently filter by that label later. That's the primary thing. You want to be able to say, show me all the documents related to Project A. Well, if I create a label called Project A and then tag all my documents Project A, I can filter by that really quickly. And so that's, you can think of this as, kind of like a folder type effect where you can put, documents attached to this label and easily, find those documents. Now, we realize it's not what, most users would consider folders, and we know that. It's more, think of it as an effective way of tagging a document. There's no way to nest these labels, so I can't put this inside of this or under it in any kind of way. So we know that there's a genuine need for folder-like behavior, but this is a good solution if you're just looking for a way of tagging your document with a certain description that you want to be able to filter by later. So the other thing I would point out too is you can tag one document with several labels. So if that's something where you have a document that fits into several different categories that you want to control with labels, you can do that. It's not limited to one label per document. The other element of this that I would like to mention is the teams. If you share a document with a team, if you're not familiar with teams, we've done past webinars on it and so on, but it's essentially just a group of people. If you want to share with a group of people and you continually find yourself sharing with the same group of people over and over again, create a team and then share with that team. The big advantage of this is it gives you another filter in the documents page. So now in the documents page, you can go in and filter by everything shared with the team or everything that's, so you get the idea. It's an easy way to filter by team-related projects. So you won't get this if you don't create the team because it doesn't actually, show you that as an option in the drop-down filters. So it's just one more effective way of filtering your documents. I can easily filter by anything shared with the team. And oftentimes, those may be the most common. Now, the other thing I would stress, and this is just a personal tip that I have just from using it a lot, is the recently opened filter is the one I use the most. So in the documents page, I use recently opened. I leave it there, and 9 times out of 10, that's where the document is that I'm looking for. Every once in a while, you call up those documents from the past, and in those scenarios, you'll need to do a search or use the filters. But I find myself most of the time in the recently opened. So let's get into this. Now, the first thing I want to mention, let's jump into the documents page. This is all about how to find what we're looking for here in the documents page. The first thing I want to mention are the filters on the left-hand side. The reason I want to mention them is you can filter by label. Right? Here's a label I have called Machine Assembly, and I've filtered by it. And you can filter by team. Right? So again, those two organizational structure, if you have a team that you share with, here's a way to filter by those teams. And you can see the documents that are shared with those teams. And then again, labels are a way to filter by the label. Now, the question then becomes, how do I create a new label and start applying it to documents? In the top right corner, you'll see a little labels icon. Right? If you hit the drop down, you'll see this option to create a new label, right? And we'll call this Worm Gear Docs, right? I'll click Create, and now I have a new label created, right? Now that just creates the label. It doesn't apply it to any documents except in this case, the document you have highlighted, which was in this case the top. So if I want to apply this label to other documents, I could just left click them in the documents page and choose the label from the dropdown. Right, so just check it. Now, as I mentioned before, you can apply more than one label to a single document. So this can belong to both the machine assembly label and the Worm Gear Docs label. There's no rule that it has to have just one. Now, the question then too is, well, how do I remove a label? If I wanted to remove a label from a document, you can just uncheck the actual label. Right. Now, if you want to delete a label altogether, right-click it from the filter list and you'll have that option. But again, keep in mind, you can easily apply a label just by checking the box. You can even like shift select multiple and then, apply a label to all of them at once if you want to. Just, control or shift select and then choose the label. Basically, anything highlighted here will have the label applied to it. That's the way to think of it. So that is applying labels, and the key to this is once I filter, once I check these as labeled, I can easily go in and filter by those docs very quickly. So if you have documents that are related and you want to organize them under a description, I think of that as your label, and that's an effective way of kind of categorizing documents that may have different relationships. One other example that I like is that I've seen very commonly is standard library stuff, where I have these documents. Maybe they're nuts and bolts, or they're standard cylinders, or they're standard parts that we use in a lot of different places. I may want to tag them with their own label so that I can easily get to all those documents and view them all in the same place. So it's another example of something that I might structure, a way I might structure my data, right? Just using the labels. So labels are one very important element of this that I wanted to bring up. The teams is another very important bit that I wanted to mention. Of course, the key to teams is creating your team, right? So if I go to manage accounts, you'll see teams here at the bottom, and you can create your team, add your team members that you want in that. So that's an easy way to share with a large group and also get the benefit of being able to filter by team shared documents. So that is labels and teams, and those are the primary tools that we have today for organizing your documents and being able to quickly find them. Now, one last thing I want to mention is, of course, the search, and this has been brought up earlier. I could do simple search, so I can say, okay, organizing, right? And it's going to filter by anything with organizing in the title. So a simple text search where all you're doing is searching by the title. But the cool thing about this, and this is something that was asked earlier, is you can also search by things like part number or revision or state. So I can say, show me all the parts that are in the or pending state. Maybe I'm an engineering manager and I want to see all the parts that are waiting for approval, right? Waiting for that review. I can filter by that in the advanced search. I can search by a combination, pending with part number PN dash something, right? So you can search by part number, you can search by description, by name, by revision, by workspace, or versions. Another important one. So just keep in mind, if you're looking for more advanced searching capabilities, this is your tool to do that. And this is something that is more often than not reserved in more traditional CAD applications to like a PDM system. That's why a lot of users aren't terribly familiar with this kind of functionality unless you have a lot of experience in those more advanced data management aspects. But again, if you add part number, if you add state, if you do all this, if you spend the time to add the properties to your documents, it's very easy to search for those things from here. You don't have to have the part name if you know the part number, right? You can easily search by that. So it's just another level of the organization that I would stress. If you go in and add all those properties, which I think more companies are doing day-to-day in Onshape, then this becomes a critical thing, right? The ability to filter and search by those things is very important. All right, so that is the advanced search. The key thing I would say, again, is you got to click the drop-down arrow in the search drop-down to bring it up. And then you can search by any of those things that we were talking about. So that is advanced search. And so these are some of the tools that I'd recommend. Again, in the document, the tab manager and the folder combination just make it a very easy way to get around when you have a bigger document with a lot of different tabs. In the documents page, it's really about labels, and tagging things with labels just makes them easy to filter for later. If you have a team that you're working with, that's another effective way that you can organize your documents. But I think the biggest thing, again, is just organizing things under that label category and easily being able to filter by that. Another tip, again, I've already mentioned it, but remember that you can filter and you can search by things other than just the part name or the document name, right? You can search by part number, description, and so on. All right, so I'd like to wrap this up today with just kind of a high-level topic about what goes into a single document. And the reason that this is difficult to answer is because every company is a little bit different. A lot of this is a company-specific decision, and it may be driven by external factors. It may be driven by PLM software decisions, right? ERP software, where it has to be structured in a certain way in order for it to be read properly into those systems. So understand that a lot of what I'm going to discuss here is very company-specific. You could go to a dozen different companies and you hear a dozen different things about how to handle managing what goes into a single document. And this is the same issue that you have when you create a lot of files, in the sense that you got to have some kind of structure to how you want to pass that data into the next system. The thing I would stress, and there's a high level spectrum you can think of when we talk about putting data into a document. There are those that put everything into a single document, all project data, even things that are shared across multiple documents. They'll put copies of that into a single document. Then you kind of have the middle spectrum, which is generally where we recommend being, and that is all data unique to the project belongs in that document. And the reason I stress unique is if you have shared parts or shared assemblies, they shouldn't be in the same document. That's the general consensus. And again, this is just driven by our use of it and other users. Here's how they find structuring the data is most common. Right now, you also have the other end of the spectrum, and that is every single part or assembly. One part assembly, one drawing is all in the same document, and that's kind of the other extreme. It may be practical in scenarios where you have if that assembly is gigantic, then I could see pushing it out into a separate document. So that's really more dependent on the size itself. But I think most users today fit in that middle spectrum, and that is, think of what is unique to the project and what's shared with other projects. And that will help you decide what goes into that document versus what goes into a separate document. Now, one-off design, obviously things are going to be in the same document. That makes sense to organize it that way. But think about future reuse. As you're designing today, is this something you're going to use in other places? Because that is one of the key factors to deciding, is this something that should be in a different document? So it's not just the simple stuff. We all know that nuts and bolts should probably be in a separate document. I think most users get that at this point. They generally put those into some kind of a standard library document. But it's not always so clear. Sometimes you're designing in a document and you realize, oh, this assembly I'm going to reuse in other different places. You can move a tab or a series of tabs to a new document. So just don't be afraid to design things in one document and then later realize, oh, this should be somewhere else. That's okay. You can right-click a tab and you can say move to and put it in its own document later. But I will say that, think of future reuse. Do you think you'll be using this in other places in the future? That would be a critical thing. If the answer to that is yes, it's probably best to put it in a separate document, right? Because you want that single shared place to be, in that one document and link to it and everywhere else that you need it. But what you want to avoid is copying the same parts or the same assemblies into multiple documents. The problem with that is if you decide later that there's some change, you're going to have to change it in a lot of different places. It's just the natural headache of having copies everywhere. It's the same thing if we had files, right? So again, I would stress, If you're going to use it in multiple places, it makes sense to put it into a separate document, right? One-off designs or versus reuse. I think that's the question. Can I do a global variable in the same document? No. Now, there are workarounds. I will say I don't want to say flat no. You can do weird things like insert a variable and then link to it, but it's not. There's no global variable function in Onshape where you can create a variable that applies across multiple tabs. That is a limitation as of today. If you want, stick around and I can discuss workarounds, but again, there's no function for this as of today. All right, so what about document organization? The thing I would stress is, again, unique to the project. I think most users today fall into that category where it makes sense to put stuff that's unique to the project in a single document and then put things that are used in multiple places in their own document. Now, that opens up its own series of questions. There are obvious things like the nuts and bolts. And what I would say to that is generally those should be in their own document. The reason I stress that is you don't want to put, companies have standard assemblies they put in multiple places, but those standard assemblies still may have design changes over time, even though they're reused in multiple places. So it's not like they're set in stone, so to speak. Now, a nut or a bolt is not going to change, right? So the reason I delineate those two is you will never need to update version on a standard piece of hardware. At least 90% of the audience out there will never update a bolt because they just don't change. But your assembly that's used in multiple places in your product line, it may change over time, and those should be in two different documents. So don't think of standard parts as everything that's shared between designs. Think of it as, well, I have my hardware that never changes, and I have my projects that may change over time. Each one of those projects that may change over time, we refer to them in this graph as reused data. Those sub-assemblies that you use in multiple different places should be in their own document, because then you can version control them separately, and you can manage the update of them in other documents separately. If you put your standard hardware sub-assemblies that do change over time in the same document as your nuts and bolts, then you don't have the control. Once you update, you're going to get a red flag and a blue flag saying, hey, your nuts and bolts need to be updated. So it's really about the update process. Think of, what do I have that never changes? Nuts and bolts and hardware being the obvious. If I have a document of nuts and bolts and hardware, I version it, and I never worry about having to version it ever again, right? Because it never changes. But then think about the reused data in my design that will change over time. Those are generally the company-specific sub-assemblies that are in multiple different product lines that may, be altered and revisioned. Those should be in their own document. They're reused in multiple places, but they evolve over time and should be separate from just the standard hardware, right? Standard hardware, I use the example of nuts and bolts, but think of anything that you use a lot that just never changes. Those should be in its own document, right? And again, the project is really that container for everything that's specific or unique to that project, right? It's not stuff that's shared, and that's the easiest way to think of it. So, of course, within that, you're going to have unique parts, unique assemblies, unique drawings, unique imported data. But you want to avoid having the things that are shared throughout. Now, the question that I get asked often is, doing it this way, structuring your data this way relies on using linked documents, right? If I insert a standard part from one document into another, that's a linked document. So the question there, those out there that are not familiar with this process, I do want to point it out. It's a very subtle thing. When you're inserting, whether you're inserting a part into an assembly or inserting a part into a drawing or an assembly into a drawing, basically anytime you're inserting anything, you're going to have this option at the top for other documents, right? So I click other documents, and here I can basically search through my entire document list, just as if I were on the documents page. the key thing I would stress here is you have to have a version established. So in order to insert anything, you must have an established version, right? So step one in your standard library document is once you've got all those parts or assemblies into your standard library document, version it. Then anywhere you want, you can insert those into other places, into other assemblies. So here I've chosen other documents. I've searched for standard library. That's what I called my document. And you can see I have standard library pneumatic cylinders. This is a library of pneumatic cylinders my company has designed that we use in a number of different places. So I've put them into their own document. You can see I'm on version 6, and I can even choose which version I want to insert. So if, I don't want to insert the latest, I want to insert, V5 or maybe even an older version, I can do that. But the big thing I would stress here is, again, I can grab this assembly, in this case, this pneumatic cylinder assembly, drop it into this document, and it's linked. You'll see a little link symbol here. This means it's linked to another document. So the big thing is this document, let me refresh here, is where the data is actually stored. And I'm inserting it as linked into all these other places, right? Now, you'll notice I use the example standard library pneumatic cylinders and not just hardware. And the reason I bring this up is pneumatic cylinders are an example of something you might change over time. If this is something my company designed and we use it throughout our product line and we later realize, we should go to a different, type of nut on the end, or we should go to a different material or a different swivel or a different eye, those are things that I would want to change in the source document and have them propagate to any other documents that I may have interacted with. And the answer is you can do that. You can make any change you want here, then create a new version here and update anywhere that was inserted. Now, you still need to right-click and choose Update in wherever it was inserted, but that's all you need to do. The big thing is we didn't want a scenario where linked documents were updating on the fly without your control. Right? We wanted the user to be able to decide, yes, I do want to update to this latest version in wherever I've inserted this. So again, the key thing is you can insert parts or assemblies into other documents very easily. The key first is creating that version, that first version, so that you can insert it anywhere else. And then if you want to update in all those other places to design changes in the source, make sure to create a new version, right? And then anywhere you've inserted it, you're going to see a little blue icon saying update, right? You'll get that visual cue that says update. So it's all about creating those versions, and those versions are really how we control the update process and the ability to insert it first. So make sure to create a version up front as well. Now, again, the thing with standard nuts and bolts and hardware, hardware that doesn't change, you generally don't have to worry about. You import it into a document or you create it in a document, you version it once, you never have to worry about it again. You can insert it anywhere you want. Because it never updates or changes, there's no real concern about how to handle that process. It's really when we start talking about company-specific things that are shared across multiple documents where you want to be aware, okay, which version am I inserting? Is this the latest? Is there a newer version that I can update to? Those are all things that you got to be aware of. And you will see it too. You will see in the insert a little blue icon indicating it's linked. But again, linked documents, really easy to use. The key is creating that version. Then you can essentially do this, and that's the goal, right? Organize my documents by standard parts, by reuse data, and project-specific, project-unique data. All right, so questions. Forgive me, I've missed a few. If I move a part into another document, what happens to any assemblies containing that part? Very good question. They automatically update with a link to the new document. So it doesn't break the link like it would if you're just moving a file, for instance, in a more traditional scenario. So you can right-click a part and an assembly and say move to a new document or a different document, and the existing document automatically updates with a link to the new one. So you shouldn't have to do anything, really. It should work the way you'd expect it to. I should mention that because I think it's really important. I've talked about thinking ahead and saying, well, what if you want to reuse this in other places? But it's not always so easy to say, well, think ahead and plan out what you want to do before you start doing it. Sometimes you get into it and then you later realize, oh no, I should have put this into another document because I'm going to use it in a number of different places. You can right click and choose the option to move to document, right? And so that will allow you to take this. You can even create a new document, put it by itself, or if you have a library of other parts that it should go with, you can choose other documents and browse. But the big thing is you're moving that tab and any references that it has to a new document. Now, references could be other parts, other assemblies, drawings. So just keep in mind anything, if you do a move to document and you move an assembly or a part, it's going to grab any references that it has, and it's going to move all of those at once. You'll see that showing here. So again, just keep in mind, move to document. If you mistakenly created a part or an assembly that should be reused, but you put it into a project as a unique piece of data, you can move it out later. I think that's what a lot of users are interested in. This mainly for those that again, you didn't realize when you were creating it that it was going to be shared across multiple projects. All right, so a few questions. It would be nice to have a drop-down to refine search by part number or other parameters. I agree. Definitely use the feedback tool and let us know. I know that other users have requested something similar, and we probably have something already, planned for something similar. But I will say, the more feedback we get, the bigger it becomes on our list of priorities, higher it goes on our list of priorities, and we're constantly reevaluating those priorities. So use that feedback tool. Let us know. The more affected users we get on these lists, the more likely it is to be to be added soon. And that's if you follow Onshape, you know that we handle updates rather frequently. So next question, does Onshape include any standard hardware parts like nuts, bolts, washers? We do not have a standard library of those things. That's something we're working on. But I will say there are apps in the App Store that will do that. Cadenas is a great app with a library of I think a few hundred thousand, even over 1 million models that are like that are nuts, bolts, washers. So if I were in that situation, I would just go to the Cadenas app, start pulling in some standard hardware that I use a lot into a document, version it, and then I can insert it anywhere I want. Onshape itself doesn't have that functionality as of yet. But there are, again, a couple great apps. And the other thing I would stress is even when we add that, it will be things like nuts and bolts. It won't be all the things that you can do, all the pumps and motors and things that you'll see in Cadenas. There's a lot of stuff on that app. Descriptions can be pretty generic and hard to distinguish between documents. Yeah, I agree. The ability to filter and search by more things when inserting is definitely something that would be very valuable. Is there a way to search any standard part is used before updating it? Question, is there a way to search for any standard part is used before updating it and copy that list elsewhere? No, there's no, that would be like a where used, where is this part used, and we don't have that as of today. I will say, I know that OpenBOM, I believe, has that. That's an app in the App Store, but there's no way to do that in Onshape as of today. Katie mentioned to create a team for standard parts like screws and nuts, etc. Absolutely. Do you recommend that? Yes. If you're in a company and you're working with a team and you all want to share this library of nuts and bolts, absolutely share it with the team. Create a team. You could call the team hardware and just share that as a team function if you find that as a valuable way to filter. But the big thing is you're all using that same library of nuts and bolts, right? That's the effective thing. So I think that's the big thing Katie's trying to stress is just, having that team means that everyone's using the same set of data. You don't have copies of nuts and bolts or, each individual has their own, miscellaneous library of nuts and bolts. You're all sharing that same set of data. So absolutely, definitely good advice. Teams are just a valuable way of sharing data sets in general. I would say the same thing about reused data. Any company-specific reused data can also be shared with the team, and ensuring that everyone uses that same document rather than each person's own version of it. All right, so that is what I had planned for you. So again, just to recap, when we talk about document organization, that's a question that gets asked often. I think most people fall into that center of the spectrum when we talk about how to organize your data, and that is really unique data belongs in a document. Things that are shared with other projects belong in their own document. Now, those other documents could be reused data, company specific things that do evolve over time, or it could be just the standard hardware that generally doesn't change, and you just have a library of that you share with. And I think that's, if you were looking for an effective way to organize your documents today, this is how I do it. There are those that venture on the extreme when we talk about design and the complexity of the design, but I think most users today fall under this category and can easily organize their documents using this kind of structure. So that's what I had planned. I am going to stick around and answer any questions that you have. So if you have any outstanding questions that I haven't gotten to, make sure to ask them in the GoToWebinar questions section there, and I will stick around and answer them. One final thing I want to point out, if you're interested in learning more on this topic as well as a number of other topics, check out our Learning Center. You can go to learn.onshape.com. There you'll find self-paced training, videos and exercises that you can walk through. There's also options for instructor-led training and technical briefings, including technical briefings, documents that walk you through how to handle situations like this. Standard library, there's a good standard library technical briefing that walks through recommended practices for managing standard library. So in general, learn.onshape.com, the Onshape Learning Center, is just a valuable resource for anyone looking to learn more about Onshape. So that's what I had planned. Again, stick around, ask any questions that you like. I will make sure to answer all of them. And thank you, everyone. Have a good day.